Thanks, Anthony. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to have a run through, like a high-level overview of how our sort of financial planning works, how our software is used, and then run through a case study where we've been able to use the software to really good effect in the last 12 months. So I'll run through this for you. As we go through, if you've got any questions at all, please just click the question and answer button to open a window, type your question. If you want the question to be anonymous, check the send anonymously checkbox. Anthony will collect those questions as we go through, and he'll ask them probably at the end. If there's anything really sort of pertinent, he'll interrupt and ask your question as we go on through. Okay, so what is financial planning? So effectively, what we do is we create a detailed picture of the client's current circumstances, so their assets, investments, debts, income, and expenditure. We then project that forward, so year by year, so using assumed growth rates, what we think their income is going to be, presumed inflation and wage rises, and investment returns throughout the rest of their expected lifetime. And then we obviously, each plan that we create is bespoke to the individual client. Fits into our client journey. So when we sort of meet a client, we always have an initial consultation, usually over the telephone, just to check that we can help. We'll then have a 1 hour sort of free meeting where we'll sit with them either face to face or via Zoom, and actually talk about what their requirements are. If we then identify that it's a way forward, we'll start our sort of fact-finding process, and this is really where the financial planning will start as well. And as we sort of do our research and sort of through the feedback meeting, we'll actually build the financial plan for the clients. And then we have implementation, is usually where we recommend particular products to try and achieve their plan. So it's all part and parcel of it, and then we obviously review it at the various annual reviews. So the financial planning sort of encompasses a large sort of range of what we're doing for clients. Obviously, with the modelling, it's only as good as the information that we use. So we'd be asking clients how long they expect to live, when they're hoping to retire, what plans and policies they have in place already, and an idea of any sort of large purchases or expenses that they have coming up. For a lot of people, they only really think about sort of 1 month at a time. So retirement planning is always a good place to start, mainly because we all hope to retire at some point in the future. But again, people knowing exactly when that is going to be is becoming more and more difficult. So it's important that we can sort of vary the plans as we go, change the data that we've used to try and help build a picture for people. Some might want to go on regular big holidays or send their children to private school, not want to take into account university fees. So everything like that can be sort of added into the plan to make it really bespoke and personal for clients as we're running through it. So once we've sort of put in people's current circumstances, we then use default assumptions to project what they have and what they'll need into the future. So the default assumptions that we use are that inflation will continue to grow at 2.5% a year. Bank account savings, we presume at the moment that they're not going to grow at all. Investment growth rates, we presume sort of 5.5%. Property will go up by 1%. Salaries will go up by 2% a year. We'll factor in annuity interest rates as well. We base our inflation sort of on the consumer price index or the retail price index, which we can sort of move to match. And we sort of use life insurance and also investment expenses as 1.5% a year, which obviously comes then off investment growth rates. So we're sort of projecting forwards on about a 4% a year growth rate to try and make sure that what we're sort of projecting is reasonable and we're not being too over optimistic about what the future is going to hold. You can then see on the right here the timeline. So this is where we start to build the plans for people, so they can actually put into place what they're expecting to happen and when. So what we're seeing on this page, there's two little figures down the bottom. So we're dealing with a Mr. and a Mrs. We've got their current ages at the beginning of the plan. So here they're 58 and 57. And then we've got, I think here they're maybe going to be buying a house or improving their home. We've got retirement. And then at the end, we've got sort of their mortality dates. So we'll often start with a timeline where we're presuming that people will live to be 100, just so that we can make sure that the money will last as long as it needs to. But then, once we're speaking to clients, they might say, well, actually, for me, my family don't tend to live very long, so let's just presume I'll live to 85, or they might choose 90 or 95. So we can vary that. And you can see we've got these two bars at the bottom, so the pre-retirement years and retirement years. And this is how the system typically defaults. But again, we can add additional sort of periods of life. So people retiring sort of early might say that they expect to spend a lot more money in the first 10 years of retirement, for example, than in later life. And so we could add an additional period for them for whatever requirements. And here you can put in care needs as well. That's what this particular element sort of signifies. So that's really the basis of our financial planning, and that can be reviewed regularly and changed to give a different outcomes. So by using the sort of financial planning software, the outcomes that we can then present to clients is to show them what they need to do to achieve their financial objectives. So if they've told us that they would like £30,000 a year income throughout retirement, it will help us to sort of demonstrate if they have enough saved or if they need to save some more, and at what rate they need to save prior to retirement. We'd also have a look to how to plan and minimise their tax liabilities throughout their lives. That could be income tax, capital gains tax, inheritance tax. How to avoid running out of money. So occasionally it could be that we need to encourage people to either save more or plan to spend a little bit less in the future. But the idea is it can actually allow people to really plan what is realistic or not. It could be that they need to work a little bit longer. So I remember in the good old days, when you speak to people in their 20s and 30s and ask them when they're going to retire, it's going to be at 55. When you speak to people in their 40s and 50s, it's usually 65. But to avoid running out of money, you might want to say to people, well, either again, save some more or plan on retiring a little bit later. And then we can also look at planning to how to transfer capital to family members at the end of the plan in the most tax efficient way as well. So those are just some of the outcomes that we would derive. So a case study that I'm going to run through with you is a client of ours, as I say, who we've spoken to this year. Quite an interesting case. He was 58-year-old and about to retire. He was 2 months away from retiring. This gentleman had had a very well-paid job for many years in the city, which obviously had allowed him to consider retiring at age 58. His main reason for contacting us was that he had a defined benefit pension scheme and also a number of smaller pensions. The total value for lifetime allowance purposes, which is the total amount you can save into pensions before you have to pay some tax charges. So the total value is currently £1,680,000. However, he had 1,800,000 of protected lifetime allowance. And this was, in fact, his main financial planning. So back in sort of 2011, 2012, he realised that he had a very good pension scheme. Back then, the lifetime allowance was 1.8 million. And so he decided to apply for fixed protection so that he wouldn't lose that 1.8 million lifetime allowance when the government then reduced the allowance down to 1.5 million, then 1.25 million, and now it's right down at 1,073,000. So he's protected it. However, the problem with taking fixed protection was that you lose it if you contribute any more money to pensions. So he spent the last sort of 8 or 9 years being really worried about somehow putting money into a pension and losing this fixed protection. So he's been very focused on his fixed protection and making sure that it's fully utilised. In addition to this, he's got around £6.4 million in savings and investments, all managed mainly by a discretionary fund manager who he's used for a long time. So he was very keen that all he wanted us to look at was the pension issue and working out what was the best way to access his pensions to avoid paying lifetime allowance tax. He really didn't want to talk about anything else at all. However, really to answer the questions about his pensions, I tried to explain that we need to have a fuller conversation and actually include his other savings and investments in the plan to really try and provide a full picture and answer his questions properly. So the main thing that he wanted answered was, should he crystallize his defined benefit pension early at the age of 58? This is rather than letting it run until age 60, which was the normal retirement age. So with defined benefit pensions, if you take them a little bit early, then there's usually some penalties involved. You'll have a slight reduction. He also wanted to know if he should crystallize his other pensions. How will his lifetime allowance be affected by these decisions? And will the inheritance tax benefits of retaining funds within his defined contribution pensions be worth it? So as I'm sure most people watching today know, where money is held in defined contribution pensions, it's treated as outside of your estate for inheritance tax purposes. Now you might be thinking, well, if he wants to retire at 58, he needs to take his pensions now, clearly, but obviously with the 6.4 million in the background, he can quite comfortably live off his savings for 2 years and then take the defined benefit pension at a later date. So it was really for him a question of which is going to be the best way to do it with a view on the lifetime allowance. So we built 4 scenarios for him. There was the base plan, which was his current circumstances. And that would have been involving taking his defined benefit pension at age 60, at the normal retirement age. And it would have involved not accessing his defined contribution pensions at all, because he would not have needed to. We then looked at taking the defined benefit pension at age 58, deferring his other pensions. We looked at crystallising all of the pensions at age 58. And then I ran another plan for him, which was to crystallise all of his pensions, but also start to put some inheritance tax planning in place. Now, this was an idea that he was not particularly keen on to begin with. I think he'd heard a lot of sort of adverse stories in the past about using offshore bonds and using sort of not very good sort of tax planning. He felt that he wanted to pay whatever tax was due, and he didn't want to do any sort of dodgy offshore planning at all. He wasn't very keen on the idea of trusts, and whilst he had a son, again, he wasn't very keen on giving money away, and having his son in his sort of early 30s have too much money too soon. So that was some concerns that he had, and that was his sort of explanation as to why he'd never really looked at the inheritance tax planning before, despite his discretionary investment managers suggesting that he might want to. So these are the 4 scenarios. I'll run through each one with you. So this is what the base plan sort of looked like. If I explain what we're seeing on the chart here, you see there's the color codes at the top. The black line is his total annual income need. He was running on wanting to have about £10,000 a month as an income. That's what he's been used to spending through his working life. So that's what we used within the plan. Red signifies a shortfall. So you can see there's no red on this chart. Again, for his purposes, cash flow planning, as it were, making sure he doesn't run out of money, was not really relevant. He's got more than enough money in the bank and in his investments to cover him for as long as he needs it. You see there's a lot of light blue on here, so that's sort of using savings and investments. So what the plan is suggesting here is that actually most of his income need will come from his savings and investments that aren't in pension or ISA wrappers. So what we would tend to do is suggest that people spend their what we term unwrapped investments first, where they're not getting any tax benefits. Money purchase pensions, you can see, I'll explain what's happening here in a second, but generally he's not needing to use his money purchase pensions at all, but he does have his defined benefit pension, which is in green. So we're looking at his age 60, where he would take the tax-free lump sum, and then you can see a small amount of his income then for the rest of his life is coming from his defined benefit pension. What we're seeing here is that in the first year or so, all of his income comes from his savings. I think this sort of spike was because we had planned in spending quite a lot of money on renovating his house. Now, what happens here, this is quite kind of important. So age 75, even if you've not taken pension benefits from a pension, at age 75, any pensions that you have are tested against the lifetime allowance. So usually, if you've got pension savings which are above the lifetime allowance, they don't actually get tested, and there's no tax charge until you actually take the benefits from the pension. So what happens here is if he takes his pension benefits from the defined benefit pension at age 60, the projections was that it would still be within his 1.8 million protected lifetime allowance. So there's no lifetime allowance tax charge, but it would have used a large proportion. So then when his defined contribution pensions are tested at age 75, what it's showing us there is that would at that point exceed his remaining protected lifetime allowance and would result in a small tax charge, which up here, total lifetime allowance tax that he would pay on the base plan is 160,899. So quite a large charge really, but small in comparison to everything else that he has. We've got 2 further bumps here, which is out of ordinary savings. And this is where they wanted to sort of factor in potentially needing £150,000 each for long-term care, sort of age 80. And this large column at the end is just showing us where the first life has died and money is passed to the surviving, in this case, spouse. So that effectively is what our sort of base plan is made up of. And you can see, yes, lifetime allowance tax would be 160,000. the total value of his assets at the end of the plan, presume the default growth rates that we've used, would be 14 million. His total estate value is 12 million. So that's the value of the plan less his defined contribution pensions, which sit within their own trusts. His net taxable estate, after we've used his nil rate bands, etc., is 11.6 million. And so the likely inheritance tax charge at the end would be 4.653 million. So the net worth at the end for his son to inherit would be 9.4 million. So then we had a look at what would happen if he took his defined benefit pension early at age 58. So you can see here we've got the pension income showing straight away. Still going to renovate his house next year. We've still got his defined contribution pensions being tested at age 75. And we've got the long-term care costs coming in as well. So the difference here, and this answers obviously one of his questions, is that if he takes a defined benefit pension straight away, the actual lifetime allowance tax charge would be reduced overall. And this is because by taking his pension straight away, he would incur those slight sort of penalties, which would reduce the value of the pension for lifetime allowance purposes, which then means that at age 75, when these defined contribution pensions get tested, they've got a bit, a larger proportion of remaining lifetime allowance to use. So that's why this overall charge fell. We can also see then by taking the pension early, the total assets at the end of the plan are slightly higher. So that's beneficial as well. The total estate value there at the end of the plan is also slightly higher. So his net taxable estate is 11,746,000 instead of 11,600,000. So the total amount of inheritance tax that he will pay is slightly higher. So it kind of offsets slightly the gains that he makes on the saves. And this is because he's got more money coming out earlier. But the net worth after all of the tax is paid of his estate at the end of the plan is 9.5 million, as opposed to 9.4. So actually taking a defined benefit pension at age 58 would seem to be the better option for the client here. We then had a look at crystallising all of the pensions at age 58. So this worked even better because he's sort of crystallising everything immediately. He uses a larger chunk of the lifetime allowance immediately, but there's less to be tested here at age 75, which is really good. So really addressing his sort of objective of minimising the amount of lifetime allowance tax charge that he's going to pay, it certainly looks like crystallising all the pensions straight away is going to be the best route to go. Again, total assets at the end of the plan is slightly higher, but his total estate value at the end of the plan is then significantly higher than it would be under the base plan, which means that his net taxable estate at the end is also quite a lot higher, which means that the inheritance tax is much higher as well come the end. And that's mainly because we've crystallised his defined contribution pensions early. The lump sums that they've generated had just gone into savings, which are not shielded from inheritance tax. So you can see that the pension values at the end of the plan are only 1.4 million as opposed to 1.8. And so actually, although crystallising all of the pensions straight away certainly achieves his sort of focus of reducing the lifetime allowance tax charge, this allows us to see that the bigger picture is that actually it increases inheritance tax that actually would reduce the net worth of his estate at the end of the plan. So what I sort of came back and introduced then was, that would happen if we crystallized all of the pensions straight away. So we take advantage of reducing the lifetime allowance. But let's have a look at sort of planning to mitigate the inheritance tax as well. And so what we talked about was that he could actually gift money straight to his son, and he and his wife could make gifts, and they could do that every 7 years, so that they're using their nil rate band on a regular basis to move money out of the estate, either by direct gifts, or if he didn't want his son to have too much money too early, as he'd stated, then we could actually use a range of different trusts to actually move the money in and plan it that way. And we could also use investment products that would benefit from business property relief. They would allow you to sort of move money into investments that actually fall out of the inheritance tax calculation after 2 years. The beauty of those are you're not using complicated trusts. The owner of the money retains ownership of it. They can access it at any time. But there are different sort of risk factors that come into play. But by sort of setting out how we could make these moves and put this plan into place, we was able to show that here the estate value at the end of the plan would be 7.6 million. Because we've got a large chunk that's invested in the business property relief, the actual taxable estate is reduced right down to 2 million. Obviously, there's money held in the trust as well. So the actual inheritance tax charge at the end would be 1 million, as opposed to more than 4.5 million. And the pension plan's value there is still the 1.4 million. So the net worth after tax increases from 9.5 to 13.2 million. So this was really a way of using the cash flow planning to address the client's primary concerns, but also start to show them that actually, yeah, you can really focus on trying to save yourself £59,000 of lifetime allowance tax charge, but actually the much bigger picture here is 3.5 million of inheritance tax that you could potentially save by doing some planning. And here's the all of those outcomes sort of showing together. So that really identifies pretty well why it's worth looking at the full picture. So when we're doing the financial planning with clients, rather than just focusing on the one area that they want to look at, actually to be able to give them the correct answers, what we want to do is look at the full picture. In this case, this was the work we did for the client. We've certainly shown him what he can do from an inheritance tax planning point of view. And he's actually gone away now and started the process of providing some gifts to his son. He's got his discretionary investment managers in the background who we can use to do some of the business property relief planning, etc. So yeah, we were able to do the job, and there actually wasn't any selling of products involved. So what we will provide at the end of the process, we have a financial planning report. Obviously, it all looks very nice on the computer, but what we can actually provide is a record of all of the sort of the fact find that we take, so all of the information that's used. We can provide a record of the default assumptions, so they can come back and see exactly what data we use to project the plan. They have a record of all of their events and goals. The financial summary, that just gives an overall view of what the future looks like. They've got the cash flow, sort of a detailed analysis there, which sort of shows year by year where their money will get spent. Shows what their likely net worth is going to be from year to year. There's then the estate analysis, which sort of shows if there's going to be any likely inheritance tax at the end. And then we can also provide lots of sort of insights, depending on, again, what their requirements are. But that includes loss capacity. So that's relating to investments. So if people want to invest money, obviously no one wants to make a loss. But what's really important for us is if you did have a loss with an investment, is that going to impact your day-to-day standard of living? We can show them what the retirement spending is likely to be. That will show the maximum that they can spend. We'll look at investment returns. We can identify any insurance needs that they may have. Identify how much they're going to need to save annually to achieve their goals. And we can also sort of plan in what would happen if there was a market crash. How would that impact the financial plan? And as I say, the potential inheritance tax. So that's the case study. Do we have any questions, Anthony?
Thank you for that, Rob. Yep, we've got a couple of questions that have come through. The first one is, how often would these plans get reviewed with the clients?
So typically we would review the plans annually. So we have an annual review with all of our clients, where again we'll either sit down with them face to face or over a Zoom call, whatever is most convenient, and then we'll pick out the plan. It's great actually for looking at what has happened over the last 12 months, but it then also allows clients to say, well, actually this has changed and that has changed for me, and now we want to do this. And what we found is that as clients get used to having this plan, they actually sort of think about it before their annual reviews, ready to come and check that they're on track. If large life events happen sort of between our annual reviews, of course we're here at any time to have a meeting and update the plan as and when it's required. Usually once a year is enough.
Perfect. I've got a couple more questions. What products would you use for clients with business property relief? If you can generalize that.
Generalize. So again, there's a couple of different elements that we can use. So we can look to invest in AIM investments, alternative investment markets. So we'd be building a portfolio then of AIM shares. Typically we would use a bespoke discretionary fund manager who specialise in AIM investments, because there's certain qualifying rules. So we'd use someone who knows exactly what they're doing, and they would build a portfolio of AIM shares, and they would then keep a check on that portfolio to make sure that the stocks held continue to qualify for business relief. But that money can then be held either in general investment accounts or also ISAs. So that was introduced a little while back, a few years back. So actually it can make the ISAs really tax efficient during the client's lifetime, but also really tax efficient sort of after death as well. There's then more specific sort of inheritance tax services, which we typically use for elder clients who perhaps have left their inheritance tax planning very late. Sometimes we'll have attorneys will come and sort of address that with us, and it means these would be far less volatile than the AIM investments. You might see 3% a year return on the money, but the main objective is to sort of move it out of the estate for inheritance tax purposes as quick as possible, and actually save that 40% IHT after a couple of years.
Thank you, Rob. And is there a typical type of client for this type of service? It's financial planning.
I would say it doesn't suit everybody, but at the same time, there's not a typical client that it suits. So I've used it to really good effect. Obviously, with this particular customer who we used for the case study today, is very high net worth. We used it there, but we've also used it for people who have reasonable savings. They've worked for 30, 40 years. They've got reasonable pension pots of maybe a couple hundred, £300,000. Determined that they can't possibly retire until they're 67 and they can claim the state pension. But when we build the plan and look at what their current outgoings are, what their likely outgoings are in retirement, quite often people have a pension fund which is far better than they thought. And it might be then that we're using the financial planning tool to actually say to them, well, you could retire at age 62 or 63 if you want to, and still not run out of money. So we would use it for those types of clients. You've then got much younger clients where we would use the insurance needs insights. So especially if you've got a husband and wife with children, especially if one of the parents is a higher earner, then you can use the planning to identify what would the circumstances be if one of the parents were to pass away early. It can identify what insurance should be required to actually help the surviving spouse and the children maintain their own standards of living. It's a way of being a bit more scientific about these requirements, rather than just saying, oh yeah, have four times death in service, that will be fine. Obviously that will suit some people but not others. So yeah, there's quite a range of different people that it will suit. Those that it wouldn't suit maybe so much are if they just want to save, but they're very sort of limited on what they can do. We perhaps wouldn't go through a full financial planning sort of exercise like that if we can't actually do anything about it at the end of the day. So we would pick and choose where can it actually be effective and where can it add value to the client's financial planning. That's where we would use it.
Thank you, Rob. We've got one last question that's come through. Can clients get a record of all the different scenarios you run for them?
Yeah, so the financial planning report that we've got on the screen here, effectively, we can generate these on a PDF for each scenario that we build. So depending on how much paperwork they want, and obviously we can then sort of just maybe produce all of the fact find information, the default assumptions, and the events and goals once, but then the detailed cash flow analysis, financial summary for as many scenarios as they want to see.
Yeah. Sorry, Rob, we keep getting more questions today, which is good. So, and can you insure for any shortfalls in the plans?
You could insure. So where we would potentially use it is, yeah, if there's a shortfall in them having enough money at the end, then really all you can do is save more effectively. You can't put an insurance policy in place to make sure they achieve what they want to if both clients are still alive, but you can certainly put the insurance in place if you're sort of looking forward and saying, well, if Mrs. A or Mr. B continues working until they're 65, continues earning the same amount of money as they are now, and you continue saving what you're saving, then you'll certainly be able to retire at age 65 and retirement will look rosy. Where the insurance would come in would be if Mrs. A or Mr. B were to die, and so they were unable, obviously, to work and save throughout the plan. That's when we would put the insurance in place to pay out a lump sum of money to replace what would have been saved in an ideal world. You can also put insurance in place to mitigate inheritance tax liabilities. So, if we can see, for example, that clients are quite cash poor, but they've got a very expensive property that they live in, which is difficult to, it's difficult to sort of mitigate inheritance tax in that circumstance. What you can do is put a whole of life insurance policy in place, write it into trust, so that upon death, enough money is paid out to allow the next of kin to actually pay whatever inheritance tax duties are due.
Okay. Thank you, Rob. So I think that's it for questions, so I won't put you on the spot
Okay.
anymore. So we'll wrap it up there. Just want to thank everybody for joining us once again. We'll hopefully be doing another sort of informal webinar in December. We will send out invitations for that in the next few weeks or so. Just a reminder, what we do with these videos, we record them and upload them to the website, so you can watch them to your heart's content. And we do have a professional connections page. If you head to our website, you can find, we've got lots of technical documents, some of our guides for things, all our videos, even some podcasts and that sort of thing on there. So please make sure